thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us today for today's seminar within the New South Wales Health Statewide Biobank Series. So my name's Jennifer Byrne. I'm chairing today, and we have two fantastic speakers that will be presenting on behalf of the ISBER organisation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But we are going to learn a lot about ISBER as an organisation that supports biobanking internationally, and how I think ISBER, the history of ISBER within Australia, and how it's also supporting biobanking locally. So we do have two fantastic speakers. I'll introduce them in the order in which they'll be talking today. So firstly, we will have Jane Carpenter, who's currently a member of the biobank team. She's employed through Health Pathology, and her background is as a medical laboratory scientist in the UK, where she held senior positions in diagnostic haematology laboratories. She commenced her biobanking career in the Children's Hospital at Westmead Tumor Bank, and then she established the operational and management structure of the Australian Breast Cancer Tissue Bank at Westmead and led its evolution over 10 years. And so Jane has a long history of involvement with ISBER as well. She served in many capacities within ISBER, including on the board of directors, and she's currently ISBER treasurer. So our second speaker is Associate Professor Dan Catchpoole, who has also a long and distinguished history in biobanking and biomedical research. So I've known both Jane and Dan for many years, and worked with Dan in his role as head of the Tumour Bank at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, where he has been for some years. Dan is also an associate professor at the University Technology Sydney. So he has two university hats, University of Sydney and UTS. In terms of his biobanking career, he's had a long association with both ISBER and the ABNA, that's the Australian Biobanking Network Association. So Dan was one of the founding members of that organisation and was also the first president. And Dan was elected president-elect of ISBER, so he's the first Australian to hold that role. He was president in 2020, and I believe he's now the past president in 2021. So we really have a fantastic resource ahead of us to tell us about ISBER and the coordination of biobanking internationally, and how Australia plays a role. So thanks very much, Jane. Look, I think we'll just say too that if you're very welcome to pop questions in the chat, but we'll probably hold the discussion until after the two presentations. So thank you, Jane.
Right, I'm not sure which screen you can see, just hopefully.
Now we can see it, it all looks good.
Right.
Looks beautiful.
Okay, so thanks, Jenny, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak about ISBER. So as Jenny said, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm currently working for New South Wales Health Pathology in the biobanking portfolio, and I've been involved in ISBER for several years now, most recently as the current treasurer. So Dan and I are going to do a bit of a double act about our experiences of being involved with ISBER, what we've learnt, how we think ISBER can be of benefit to you, and to ask what you would like to get out of the organisation. And as Jenny said, I'm the current ISBER treasurer, which is a 3-year stint. I'm currently just finished my first year, so I've got 2 to go, not that I'm counting. And I've previously been on the board of directors representing our region for 2 terms of 3 years each, so it's a total of 6 years on the board before I took on the treasurer role. Now, my first involvement with the organisation was as a delegate at a meeting in 2006. And subsequently to that, I joined the Education and Training Committee, where I was a member there for 4 or 5 years. And I was also the co-chair of the scientific programme and the organising committee for the meeting that we had in Sydney in 2013, which is where I think a lot of Australians actually got a bit of knowledge about ISBER and what it's all about. Slide's not moving. There we go. So I'm going to give a very quick introduction about ISBER's evolution, major milestones that I think have been important over the year, how Australia fits into this, a bit about the structure of the society, because if you're not involved in it, you don't necessarily know how it all works, what you can get out of it, and how you can get involved if you wish to. Plus a very light touch about some of the products that ISBER offers, and the future directions I'll leave to Dan to postulate on. As last year's president, he's obviously been very involved in steering the future planning and the direction of the society. And if you've got any questions about that, he's the best person to go to inform you there. So how did it all start? And the idea really of an international society or organization for methods, best practice, exchange of information about biobanking was conceived in the USA in 1999, or we could say last century now. Mainly, this was a group of cancer researchers who'd got samples that they knew needed to be handled carefully to give good research results. But they also recognized that any new organization needed to go beyond cancer and human samples and include the wider environment, animals, plants, fish, microbes, etc. And as Jenny said, there were similar conversations being held around the world, and in Australia around about the time, or a couple of years later, the ABNA was formed, or the ABN as it was at that time. And in Korea, the Korean National Resource Centers, whereas the ABNA focused on human tissues, the KNRRC was very broad and encompassed agriculture, human health, microbes, etc. So it was kind of a global recognition, I think, around that time that things needed to improve. And this is just a bit of a timeline. I apologize for the poor graphics. I put it together myself about how things developed from the ISBER perspective. So after this initial planning meeting in 1999, the society was formally chartered in 2000. And there was a bit of a kickoff meeting in Washington that was part of one of the NCI's, the National Cancer Institute meetings over there. And there's been meetings every year since. And some of the things I think were kind of important. The first meeting outside the US was in 2004. Unfortunately, this was before I was involved in ISBER, so I didn't get to go to Perugia, which would have been nice. There were 2 meetings that year. There was also one in New York, but that was the first one outside of America. So that really showed that they were thinking globally, not just North American centric. Around the same time, the first edition of the best practices was produced, and that's had second, third, fourth versions now. And that's really been one of the key ISBER products. It's kind of the thing that ISBER is really well known for. And it's really, as soon as one version's finished, really it's ready to write the next one, because things do change, especially in areas such as technology, ethics, governance, and as new scientific methods are developed and brought into the kind of mainstream, biobanks really need to come together to support evidence-based practice. Another thing that I think was important to develop was the journal. So it was first published around 2002, I believe, but an official affiliation with ISBER, which was then called Cell Preservation Technology, came in around 2005. And then it changed its name and was kind of relaunched as Biobanking and Biopreservation in 2009. And the application to have an impact factor for that journal kind of started. It's quite complicated. It doesn't just happen. You have to apply and be approved and go through various processes. And I think an impact factor came in around, from memory, 2013-14. And it's not a huge impact factor, but then it's a very niche kind of area. I don't think it ever will have a massive impact factor, but the number of submissions every year to that journal and the quality of the submissions is going up all the time. And the impact factor is slowly on the increase. Also, 2011, the Proficiency Program, which is really a QIP for biobanking, was launched. That's another global quality program. It's run by the Integrated Biobank of Luxembourg. So it's run by Fei Betsu, who is a well-known biospecimen science guru. So it's a very good program, and that's expanded over the years as well. Initially, I think it was just DNA, RNA measurement, but there's other things. I've not been involved in it for a few years, so don't quote me on the services, but there are things like anatomical pathology reporting and things like that in it now, and as well as RNA and DNA extraction, I believe. But I think really the biggest development in the evolution of ISBER was in 2003, when ISBER became an independent society. Took charge in same year that we had the meeting in Sydney, coincidentally. So we kind of took, at that point, we took charge of our own destiny. It was registered as a non-profit organisation, and it has a charter that we're responsible under for every aspect of operation and finances. There's a policy or a directive or a document for every single thing that we do. And at that point, they engaged a society management company to look after all the administration. So you will, if you've been involved in ISBER, you'll have heard of Malachite, who are based in Vancouver, and they are the society organisation company. So they look after all the administration, they look after the annual meeting arrangements, so booking of the hotels and rooms, etc., but not the scientific program. They're not scientists or biobankers or administrators, and so the members drive the directions of the meetings and the direction that ISBER itself wants to take. But they have been very supportive. They're still there since 2012. And for the most part, we think they do a very good job. And one of the first things that followed the independence of ISBER, if you like, was the adoption of a regional charter. And that was really to try and better integrate all regions of the world, which is kind of where Australia began to fit in a little bit more, I think. Also, I'll talk about those later. Don't need. So getting back to core ISBER business, these are the stated goals of the society. I'm sure you've seen them before. In fact, if you've been to any ISBER meetings or presentations, you've probably seen this exact same slide before. It's one of the authorised slide sets. And really, the best way of supporting these or of introducing any goals or things that you think ISBER should be looking at is to get involved in the society. And there are a number of pathways on how you might do this. So really disseminating information on repository management, education and sharing information, act as a voice for repositories, developing best practice guidelines, providing information about repositories and bringing members to work on emerging issues. The last one's been particularly prevalent over the pandemic time, I think. And so who is ISBER today? And I think this is actually an old version of the map. I think there are a few more countries on here than this displays, but there are over 40 countries now that have got ISBER members. And a personal observation, which may or may not be true, but statistically, I think more of the less developed countries are now becoming increasingly engaged and interested in improving quality practices, which can only be a good thing. So the members obviously include biobank professionals, academic researchers and scientists, industry vendors and suppliers, which was kind of a new thing when I first joined ISBER. They've got a very heavy presence and they're very supportive of ISBER, and in some countries, governments also. And this is really just for interest. It shows how membership of ISBERs grew in the early 2000s, when I think biobanking as a discrete science really took off as a discipline in its own right, as opposed to researchers shoving things into freezer. And it's kind of plateaued off over more recent years, but there's a definite growth when biobanking as a discipline was growing. And I think one thing of note is that ISBER is often perceived as predominantly a North American organisation-based society. And in reality, that's true, because the number of people who live in the USA, the population of the country, and the number of members got there is obviously hugely balanced towards America in particular, but also Canada. But I think increasingly Australia are interested, and it's interesting that we're actually the third largest by country. We are the third largest number of members. So given the small population of Australia, we're really punching above our weights in terms of involvement in the society. But we are definitely overshadowed by the USA, and when you add all the European countries together, then the Indo-Pacific Rim, which is where we are, we're a small player. But I think we do tend to have more individual members than some of the other places. These are the purple ones are the organisational members, the green ones are the individual people who pay their own fees. And I think that really reflects biobanking landscape in Australia and our region. We don't tend to have very large scale operations like some of the other countries do. And also the big vendors who have got big organisational members don't tend to be based in Australia. They're other parts of the world, mainly the USA. So I think globalisation of membership has been reflected in distribution of the annual meetings. So we have had several meetings outside of North America over the the first one was 2005. Although when you show the US map, there are a lot that have been in US. Obviously, a couple in Canada, and a lot in the Washington DC area. I mean, there's a few reasons for this. Not only because the majority of the members are in the USA, but it's also financial. Meetings in the USA attract more delegates because it's easier for local people to travel, and it also attracts more vendors who ISBER are quite heavily dependent on for their financial support to keep the organisation sustainable. But we're trying to moving to a pattern of having the meetings in blue are the ones in North America, moving to 2 years in North America, 1 year outside, 2 years in, 1 year out, which was kind of trending quite nicely until COVID hit, dislodged that, so we didn't have a meeting at all in 2020, and last year's meeting was virtual. Sorry, this year's meeting was virtual, and because of our commitments with the North American hotels, etc., got tough penalty clauses to get out of. The meeting next year will be in Atlanta, replacement for this year's meeting in the USA, and probably the meeting the year after. But hopefully we will get back into this cycle and hope to get a meeting closer to home as soon as we possibly can. And one of the objectives of becoming an independent society was to develop a regional charter, and this was adopted in 2014 to try and better engage the world outside North America, but also to engage North America, the US local issues with their own regional issues and legislations that really don't concern us a great deal. So it kind of splits them off. So the regions, the Americas, China, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and Indo-Pacific Rim. And our region encompasses a lot of different countries, a lot of different cultures. It's quite a challenging region, I think, to be truly representative. So I want to move on a bit about the structure of the society, as people are not necessarily aware of how it all is organised. So really, the executive structure is the board of directors, and the presidential role is a 3-year role. He's a year as president-elect, a year as current president, a year as past president. The treasurer and secretary, they're also 3-year roles. And these positions are all voted by the entire membership, so anyone who's an ISBER member can vote in the elections. And then each of the regions on the previous map have a director at large who is responsible for them, but elections for those positions are only within your own region, so we can only vote for when the Indo-Pacific position comes up. We can't vote for America and they can't vote for us. And if you can, I would urge you to vote, because voting is not particularly huge. We've not got a massive membership in our area anyway, so every vote counts. So what's involved if you're on the board of directors, or they have meetings every month. There's a monthly teleconference. There's other ad hoc activities. There's a face-to-face meeting at the annual conference, which usually goes for 3 or 4 hours. They have it's a joint monthly meeting with the committee chairs. The treasurer and secretary each have a monthly one-on-one meeting with the executive officers at Malachite, plus they chair their own committees. The presidents have presidential meetings every month. So there's quite a lot of meetings, and usually after you've had a meeting, there's an action plan and you're assigned something to do. So the timing of the meetings is better than it used to be. It used to be kind of 3 a.m, whereas we tend now it's either early morning or late at night for us lucky enough to be in this part of the world. So the standing committees, so the board is the chair of the board is the current president. The finance committee is chaired by the treasurer. The nominating committee, that's a committee that nominates when people put names forward for position. If people want to stand for directors or the board, and they kind of need to be vetted. We can't have a cast of thousands standing for each position. So the nominating committee, which is chaired by the vice president, they go through the applications and decide who really would be the best people to put forward. And the governance committee is chaired by the secretary. So under the executive structure are the advisory committees. And really these are the committees where if you want to be involved in ISBER, this is the place to start. They're open to any ISBER member to apply to join. So if you're interested in any of these topics, there is a mechanism to join a committee as a volunteer. There is registration online, but we know that wasn't working earlier in the year, and some people's expressions of interest to join a committee just didn't get through. So if you do want to be involved in anything and you go down that online application, if you don't hear anything, please get in touch with the main ISBER office to make sure that they've actually received your application, because we know there have been issues. We think it's resolved, but hopefully not. Most of the committees meet every month, depending. The scientific program committee ramp up towards, probably meet fortnightly towards just before the annual meeting. They put the program together. That can be a shorter term membership if there's a scientific program in your area. For example, if there was one in Australia, we'd try and ramp up some more Australian people on that committee. So it can be a kind of 1 or 2 year commitment, whereas the others, they like you to stay on a little bit longer for continuity. Each of these committees has an elected chair, and they join, that chair of the committee joins with the board of directors once a month for a joint meeting, so that the committee chairs know what's happening at higher organizational level, and the board know what's happening amongst all the committees, because it's really these committees that do the hard crunching work that produce, education and training committee does a lot of work, and a lot of them have subcommittees from their committees, so there is a reasonable amount of commitment if you want to be on a committee, but it's very interesting, and I found it very useful or informative to find out globally what was happening. So we do tend to be a bit insular in our part of the world, just by gist of geography, but it's very good to know what's happening internationally. And under the advisory committees, as a less onerous commitment, are working groups. And again, if you're interested in any of these, you can contact the lead person in the group and ask if you want to join. The biospecimen science group in particular did a lot of work maybe 10 or so years ago, really finding out what was important with sample quality and standards and things like that. And then there's special interest groups that they have an even lower commitment and activity, and they may morph into a working group, or they may be transient and just devolve if they're not sufficiently supported. My own observation is that these may often come about with like-minded individuals after talking at one of the annual meetings or at a round table. Someone has a great idea, and if they have an active leader to drive them, they do very well, but they do tend to drift off a little bit. But if they're sufficiently important, they may even morph into working groups and go further through. And there is a regional ambassador program, and this was launched